be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 36th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets My Little Pony? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of tkepner on fanfictionnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Dumbledore stepped out of the flue into a very nice sitting room. I hope I haven't kept you waiting, he said as he wand the ashes away while examining the room. It was a casual room that would have been fitting for any middle-class wizard family. Not at all, replied Twilight. I've only been here a few minutes, myself, she said, having stepped back to allow him entry. We don't want to waste time, so let's head on over to the portal. The Scottish Highlands had already been dark when he left. But here in the flatlands, the sun had just started to disappear over the horizon, he saw, as she led him out of the house. As he had anticipated from his last visit to Little Whinging, there was a street with its periodic lights. But the rest of the development was gone. The Equestrians had completely changed everything, removing well over 3/4 of the houses. The house they had exited fronted on a large, unfenced park that separated them from the building in front of them. The Muggle pictures he had seen of the embassy didn't do justice to it. He suppressed his surprise and just followed the witch through the park and a side door into a wing of the enormous building. He felt the presence of non-apparition and anti-portkey fields settle over him. Of course, the Equestrians would know how to block both apparition, teleportation, and portkeys. The security wizard nodded to him, but raised no objections beyond a cursory examination. The area nestled between the building's wings was much larger than he had thought. Based simply on that, he reasoned that this building easily rivaled Hogwarts in area, if not height. The dome over the portal area he had seen in photographs, but seeing it in real life made it much more imposing, especially at night. The huge rotating door was an interesting idea, security-wise. No one could sneak past without being detected. He noticed the runes on the lower edges of the dome, and its door, that no doubt searched for magical artifacts and their contents. Once more, they were waved through the security. The spiral deck around the tree was an unusual tactic. What he found especially interesting were the changing rooms. It was in good humor that he changed to the robe. He tucked his wand into its holster on his wrist. Twilight looked back at him. Remember, on the other side you'll be a unicorn. He nodded in acknowledgement. He really expected, though, that he would turn into his animagus form. If, that is, his theory was correct that the pony forms were merely the animagus forms of the equestrian wizards. Walking through the portal was as odd as the vanishing cabinets he had once used, many decades ago. He continued walking for a few more steps, as a quadruped, before stopping. However, finding that when he attempted to return to his human form, he couldn't do so, left him speechless. He studied his new form carefully. He noticed that, while he still had his beard, also still white, he was actually a tiny bit shorter than Princess Twilight. It was a very unusual perspective for him. He normally was taller than all but the tallest of wizards and witches. His coat was gray. His mane, and tail when he looked, were a lighter gray, almost white. His magic felt odd, though. After a moment's reflection he understood. He no longer needed his wand to cast magic. He could feel it coiling at the base of the horn on his head. With just a thought, he lifted the package with his robes from the pocket. Fascinating, he said, floating the package before his eyes. We should hurry, said Twilight, already removing the robe he was wearing and taking his package. An Auror stepped up to them. Princess Twilight, he said. She sighed. I'm sorry Albus, but he's going to cast a quick verification spell at us. Just relax. He said, looking around. That was when he noticed that everyone around him was a pony. There had to be at least a dozen ponies watching from various locations around the portal. A slight movement at the top of his vision brought his eyes up to see four walled platforms arranged on the inside of the dome with both a unicorn and a pegasus looking down from each. Each pony was a different set of colors between coat and manes. He was completely flummoxed at what he was seeing. He had seen that the first years were all different, except for the Weasleys all having the same mane and tail colors, but he hadn't realized just how much variation there was on this side of the portal. It was, like the Muggles would say, like seeing the aftermath of an explosion in a paint factory. He followed Twilight carefully, looking around alertly. She explained as they walked that ponies didn't have an animagus form, so neither did he, here. He was, for all intents and purposes, going to be a unicorn during his entire visit. He was beginning to suspect that everything he had thought he knew about the Equestrians and where they came from was very, very wrong. He decided to just accept what he saw and worry about his erroneous conclusions later. There would be plenty of time later to review his memories. This was a massive construction, much more so than the other side. The dome here had to be at least a yard thick, he saw, as they transited through the rotating door. Plus, each wing of the rotating door was equally thick. The security check was more thorough, as well. He had to remove and let them inspect his wand and its holster, and the package he had brought with him. They explored every pocket. It was all very fast, and he realized that they had had a lot of practice because of the staff and personnel from the embassy passing through daily. The changeling coming through must have shaken them more than Twilight had indicated. It would take a very determined and sneaky wizard or witch to make it through what he saw. If they could even manage it. The walls he could now see were easily as high as the tallest spire at Hogwarts. It would enclose not only Hogwarts but reach to the edges of the Forbidden Forest on the far side of the Quidditch pitch and to the Mermaid Village in the lake. The security check at the massive wall outside the dome was equally thorough. It was only as they passed through the wall that he realized it was as thick as an average Muggle house. The Aurors watched in all directions. It made him wonder what they were keeping out. Or was it keeping in? He was glad he had a four-legged form as an animagus, otherwise he would have had great difficulty managing the quick pace she set once they left the portal area behind them. On the other hand, he could now see that the high walls around the portal weren't merely around it. They extended for a considerable distance beyond it and paralleled the path they were trotting down. The walkway was bordered with a park-like setting on either side of them. The occasional movement on the wall that he saw let him know that even here they had a strong aura presence, although much more hidden. He noted the buildings on either side just before they reached the portal. Building. The signs adorning them clearly marked a hotel, administration building, 3 aura complexes, and an area set aside for drilling. Just from the ponies he could see, who all appeared to be wearing gold armor, he estimated that this one location had more auras than the ministry did. He knew gold had magical resistance, but to include such quantities in mere armor indicated a supply that went well beyond anything the ministry could muster, that it was even plentiful enough to use it in that manner, as well as for money. The portal building was the final check. Once they were through that, Twilight said, "Let me teleport you to Rarity's. She can fashion some brilliant clothes for you for the ball." Seconds later they were walking into a most charming-looking building. Rarity, he saw, had been waiting for them. This time she wasn't carrying a sword. He took his package from Twilight, and showed her the robes he had been intending to wear. With a stunning display of magic, she quickly fashioned a set that would easily rival them and yet fit him perfectly. While he was being fitted, Twilight went into the back, and, a moment later, came out with a tea set floating in her wake. "Can you tell me a bit about this ball?" he asked Twilight as the sound of scissors and a sewing machine filled the background. Watching the pony manipulate so many items at one time was amazing. "It's in honor of someone on the other side of the portal. He's been made an honorary knight of the realm for his assistance in setting up the embassy." Dumbledore felt his eyebrows go up a bit. We'd been stymied with our efforts back in August to get the attention of the Muggle government when he appeared. He managed to get us to their Prime Minister in only a couple of days. He has been indispensable since then. She smiled at him over her cup. You'll meet him at the ball, I'm sure. He, his wife, and his daughter are all three what you call near squibs. They have magic but not enough to be accepted by your school. She looked at him slyly. Unlike you and the other witches and wizards, the Searles, that's their last name, of course, they are all Pegasi. She sighed and frowned. The Weasleys don't follow the rule of magical ability through the portal, unfortunately. It's Discord's fault. He did something to them, so now their form on this side of the portal is the same as their animagus form on the other. It's rather confusing when you have to deal with exceptions to scientific rules. She sighed, then shook her head. She looked at him inquisitively. How long did it take you to learn the animagus form? How old were you when you did it? Why don't more witches and wizards find theirs? Rarity interrupted without looking up from her sewing work. Twilight, she said sharply. Twilight stopped with her mouth open, then sheepishly rubbed a hoof on the back of her neck. Sorry, she said. He smiled back at her and finished his tea. As I mentioned before, my animagus is a Nigerian dwarf goat. It took me almost a full year, but then again, I am gifted at transfiguration. I was 18. And most don't think it's worth the trouble. A Nigerian dwarf goat. Ha! I wasn't expecting that. She sat silent a moment, thinking. Tada! Cried Rarity. She brandished a brilliant purple cloak with stars and moons on it with wide brown trimmings, at least as wide as his hoof, which held intricate designs in gold, red, green, and blue. The hat that accompanied the cloak was the standard wizard's hat, but with the same intricate symbols on its brim and in a hoof-wide band at the base. She explained, I had already decided that I should keep your basic design, but with these as a sample, she held up his dress robes, I can do even better. Everyone will love your robes at the ball. When Albus looked closer he realized that the designs on the band of trim were actually the Hogwarts house's symbols and colors in a repeating pattern. The eyes of all the mascots were tiny gems, as were the stars. He noticed the stars and moons were moving, just as they had on his dress robes. She had managed all that in just the time he had been here. Without a wand. He shook his head in disbelief and admiration. Then he remembered that she did have a wand, just one that was attached to her head. Still, it was a delightful accomplishment in such little time, and it hadn't been conjured. Wasn't magic wonderful? She swung the cloak over him, arranged it to her satisfaction, and then brought a mirror over. He looked magnificent. He couldn't help but slide his beard and admire his look. He wondered if that sunburst fellow would be at the ball. And how this ensemble would look on his animagus form back home. It is superb, he said aloud. I applaud your speed and skill. No seamstress I know would ever have been able to do this so quickly and elegantly, and with such marvelous results. Rarity blushed. I am the best fashionista in all of Equestria, she said demurely. If this is a sample of your work, I would certainly expect that to be true. Blushing, she gathered her own gown and they set out for Twilight's castle. While not as big as Hogwarts, it certainly put to shame any of the pure BLD manners he had seen. Even in the night, it sparkled and glittered. That it was made entirely of crystal left him gobsmacked. The magical potential of such a thing was incalculable. It took only a moment after Twilight announced him after entering the sitting room that Percy Weasley said, "Headmaster," in an astonished tone. To say his students were amazed to see him was an understatement. Good evening, he smiled at their reactions. While Princess Twilight was visiting me earlier today, she invited me to the ball this evening. I thought it would be interesting to see Equestria for myself. So, he sat and spread his forelegs, here I am. Twilight cleared her throat behind him. I'll leave you here while Rarity and I get dressed. The others should be down shortly. Rarity had already headed for her room at the castle. You look splendid, Headmaster. Percy said, smiling ingratiatingly. Albus couldn't help but look a little smug. Yes, I think this cloak is perfect. Miss Rarity just made it for me when I arrived only half an hour ago. She is extremely talented. He stood quietly as they admired her work. He looked over to Sweetie Belle. She's your sister, correct? She nodded and went back to her conversation with Apple Bloom. Tell me, have you enjoyed your holiday? He asked in general. They eagerly started telling him of their adventures since they had arrived. Gradually, the others came down from their rooms until Twilight sent Harry to fetch the twins. He was inclined to take some of their commentary as exaggerations. But looking around the castle and remembering the fortress around the portal made him hesitate to so cavalierly dismiss them. The adult ponies he easily was able to identify by the candy colors of their coats, manes, and tails. They were the same as when he had met them when they were dealing with the basilisk. He hadn't been sure if their colors were only when they were animagi, and not their true forms. It was interesting to note that while their coat colors did not match their wizard and witch forms, their mane and tail colors matched their hair. Having Rainbow Dash darting around the room almost at the ceiling as Scootaloo admiringly followed her gave him another clue as to why Scootaloo loved to fly. Their arrival, via Flo, in the reception room at Canterlot Castle was quiet, except Harry slid across the slick floor as he exited. He didn't quite exit like a cannonball, more like that football the Muggles played. Watching him trying to break before he hit any pony, or furniture, was very amusing to the headmaster. He had to wonder if their version of the Flo network was the same as England's. If it was English, they must be importing the Flo powder by the ton. That they used a hoof pedal to dispense exactly the right amount of Flo powder was an interesting innovation, and prevented waste. It was simple enough that a child could operate it. It also had a lock to prevent childish mischief or accidents. As soon as they had all gathered themselves together, Albus removed the Flo ashes. The Auror ponies in the room took careful notice of what he cast. They cast the verification spell at each member who had come through the Flo. Maybe the changelings were a bigger threat than he had thought. Or the trauma of their attack had been much worse than he had suspected. Twilight then led them to the main ballroom. Being part of a royal party, she took them through a special entrance, and bypassed the long line of ponies waiting in the corridor to enter. Dumbledore had been to parties, both ministry and not, but this ballroom put all the other locations to shame. The room glittered with gold embellishments and gems everywhere he looked. He checked the floor to see if it was anything more than the wood or stone he expected. The floor was marble, with gold inlays and an occasional gem. There had to be some sort of sticking charm on it, as he would have expected the floor to be too slippery for hoofed animals to maintain their footing hoofing. The room was huge, easily double the length of a Quidditch pitch for floor area. It was nearly as high as the goals on a pitch, at least 15 yards. There were 2 floors of balconies above the tables and chairs that lined the walls. The balcony railings were just high enough to prevent accidents, but low enough for Pegasi to step up onto and fly across the room or down. And fly they did. The orchestra was already playing, and a few were performing what could only be called aerial ballets. Other ponies were already dancing in the middle. Astonishingly, they were split between couples or groups who danced upright on their rear legs and those that danced on all fours. He would have stopped to watch, but Princess Twilight didn't. The 2 princesses were standing to one side of the entrance and welcoming the guests. Beside Princess Luna, who really towered over him as a pony instead of being only a few feet taller, was another, a appealing white alicorn, who towered over her. That had to be Princess Celestia, he guessed. Wearing a crown to match her sister made it rather obvious. That and the fact that theirs were the only manes and tails that drifted above and around them as if alive. And the colors were the embodiments of the night and day skies. He felt like a child among adults, for a brief moment. Beside them both were 6 other ponies, a pink alicorn, who also wore a crown, and 5 others. The first 2, unicorns, looked comfortable and were exceedingly polite to their guests and bored to Albus' experienced ministry ball eyes. The 3 Pegasi, between the first two princesses and the pink alicorn, had the manner of mice in a snake's nest. Outsiders of low status, he would guess. Possibly one of them was the guest of honor. Twilight led them over to join the welcoming line. Albus was rather puzzled by this. He would have thought she'd go there herself and leave the rest to find their table. "Sorry I'm late," she whispered contritely as the adult ponies of their group lined up beside the last stallion in the receiving line, a white unicorn with two four-pointed stars on his flank, a gold one over a blue one, canted to make 8 points. The stallion gave her a quick disapproving glance. "The princesses decided to open the doors early," he whispered back. "Royalty should always be ready early," he reproved her. He managed to do it snootily, too, making it seem as if she were negligent in not being here much earlier. Rather impressive, Albus thought. It made him wonder why the unicorn thought he could reprimand the alicorn, given that her status was well above his. Was he related to the royal family? If so, why wasn't he an alicorn? Or could only Mares be alicorns? Princess Celestia looked over at her, and the group following her, and said, "And who is this fine stallion in the gorgeous blue cloak, Twilight?" She smiled at Albus, then glanced at Princess Luna. She smirked. "Is this your latest beau?" The ponies in the line stopped and stared. As did every pony who had heard her. Princess Twilight's eyes shot wide open. She shrank back, startled, and glanced between Albus and Princess Celestia. He's what?" she sputtered in a panic. She blushed a brilliant pink. An incredible accomplishment because even her fur turned pink. Princess Luna had a smirk, as did the bigger alicorn. The three ponies between the alicorns were clearly clueless. But, by their expressions, they were relieved the attention was off of them, even if just for a moment. Both white unicorns rolled their eyes. The purple alicorn's friends all burst out laughing. Albus tried to keep his expression bland. Decades of politics helped. He merely projected an air of polite inquiry. To Albus' surprise, it was Harry who spoke up. He sighed, and said, "Princess Celestia, Princess Luna, Princess Mi Amore Cadenza, Prince Shining Armor, Prince Blueblood." The boy had skipped over the three nervous ponies, telling Albus that he didn't know them. Thus, he was correct in his judgment that the three were guests being honored and introduced to the kingdom's elite. They had to be the muggles mentioned by Princess Twilight. "This is the headmaster of my school on the other side of the portal, Hogwarts, Headmaster Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore." Headmaster Dumbledore, and he proceeded to introduce the others to him. This gave the older wizard the opportunity to reaffirm who the individuals were in his mind. He nodded to each as Harry said their names. "It is a pleasure and honor to meet you," he said, as he awkwardly bowed when Harry finished. "And he's not dating my mum," Harry added, making Princess Twilight's fading blush return to nearly full strength. And the snickers and smirks to return to her friends, as well. Several of the ponies in the line looked disappointed. He noticed that most of those in the line were unicorns. There were Pegasi and Earth ponies, but they seemed distinctly in the minority. Princess Luna added, "And this is the newly christened Knight of the Realm Castor Searle, his wife, Milada Surud Searle, and his daughter, Talia Asker Searle." The three acknowledged his nod with ones of their own as they were named. She smiled at him. "I believe you would say they were muggles, with a smidgen of magic." Castor must be the one Princess Twilight had mentioned. Albus would need to talk with the man at some point tonight. The squib must be rather high in the Muggle government to have been responsible for that embassy he had seen. Especially if the two sister princesses had bestowed a knighthood on him, even if it was honorary. He also wanted to determine just how much the man knew of the wizarding world, and whom he had told. He needed to know just how much of the Muggle government was aware of the wizarding world. He had thought it was only the Prime Minister, but this event meant that there had to be far more people involved. Had the English Muggles noticed the true reason behind the accidents from the Wizarding Civil War? Once things settled down, the welcome line rearranged itself. Albus took notice of the new order very carefully. Princess Celestia and Luna were first. Then came the Searles, which told Dumbledore that a political statement of some kind was being made, whether to the Equestrian Society or the Muggles, he wasn't sure. Possibly both. Princess Mi Amore Cadenza. He was somewhat embarrassed. He had thought her name was one word was next with Prince Shining Armor beside her. Albus assumed Prince Shining Armor must be her husband. Next came Princess Twilight with Harry, then Prince Blueblood. Then the rest of Princess Twilight's friends lined up, with the fillies beside their sisters. Princess Twilight indicated that he came next and then the Weasleys and Myrtle. He wasn't sure why he and the Weasleys were included, but he quickly learned that Twilight's friends were all considered nobles of the realm and everyone addressed them, Lady. Oh, dear. He hadn't realized their importance. They acted nothing like the snooty influential purebloods he knew. Harry did indeed hobnob with the important ponies in Equestria. He probably had as much political pull here as Albus did in the Ministry. Getting the boy to stay in the wizarding world would be a challenge if he wanted to leave. The line was a rather unusual arrangement, he thought. He would have expected that the princesses would be seated at the head of the room. But, perhaps, this was custom for them. The line of ponies had once more resumed moving when he noticed a most unusual creature abruptly appear standing beside Princess Celestia, shaking her hoof in his hands. "So good of you to invite me," it said. It towered over her, nearly twice as tall. In fact, if it had stood completely upright, it would have been twice as tall. The creature bore a resemblance to a Chinese dragon, but had a horse-like head, with a deer antler on the right, a blue goat horn on the left, one long fang, different-sized pupils, a snake tongue, a goat beard, and white bushy eyebrows. It had the right arm of a lion, the left claw of an eagle, the right leg of a lizard, and the left leg of a goat. In addition, it had a bat's right wing, a bird's left wing, a horse's mane, and a dragon-like snake's tail with a white tail tuft. Lady Fluttershy noticed where Albus was looking and exclaimed, "Discord." She happily ran up to the creature with a pleased grin. It was the most energetic action he had seen from her. This was the wizard Discord. He stared at the thing in shock. Albus was too far away to hear clearly what Princess Celestia said in reply. Fluttershy's welcoming hug, however, was quite a contrast to everyone else's reaction, which ranged from horror to exasperation. Mostly horror. The line of ponies greeting the royals became noticeably shorter as those farthest from the thing that was Discord discreetly abandoned their positions and set out for the tables and chairs at a rather quick pace. New ponies entering the hall were clearly just as disturbed by the creature's presence. Those already within easy recognition range were clearly too scared to abandon their positions for fear of being sought out later. Although, the longer he stood there focused on the princesses and her friends, the braver the ones at the end of the line became at abandoning it. Albus studied the creature as best he could without leaving his place. He remembered quite well Molly's description of the powerful wizard she had said was called Discord. After he discounted the creature's current outlandishness, the similarities were apparent. The wizard Molly had described had appeared to be made of the many different races of man. Discord, here, was clearly made up of the different races that made up Equestria. Based on that meant each different feature was from an intelligent race here. Albus pushed the implications of that aside for later examination. What was more stunning, and took the forefront of his mind, was the overwhelming feeling of power radiating from the creature. He had thought Princess Luna was powerful when he had met her at Hogwarts, based solely on the aura leaking into her surroundings. He had expected her sister to be even more so based on how Harry and the three witches had said she was the older sister. Since coming through the portal, though, he had noticed that the ambient magic in the area hid magical auras, or, rather, an individual's aura had to be very powerful before it rose above the ambient level enough for someone else to detect it. Even then it only would be seen by those who were accomplished in seeing auras, very powerful and experienced wizards such as himself. The magical background here dwarfed that of Hogwarts and the other magical locations with which he was familiar. Usually, if he concentrated on auras, he could detect almost any wizard in 100 yards. Here, he could pick up a unicorn only if it was within a yard or so. For the Earth and Pegasi ponies, he couldn't detect their magic at all. He had been able to detect Princess Twilight's from several yards without a problem, but only if he stilled himself and searched for her. Lady Rarity had been almost impossible to detect even when she was casting spells constantly. If she had been quiet, she would have required the pony equivalent of hominum revelio to find her. When he stilled himself here, the two sisters dwarfed both Princess Twilight and Princess Cadance. The sisters easily dominated the room, with Princess Celestia overtopping Princess Luna by half. No wonder their manes and tails floated and glowed with so much magic, it had to manifest itself somehow. At first, he had thought it an affection that the princesses used to establish their station. But if their magic replenished at a high enough rate, was it merely a way for them to burn off their excess magic so it didn't build up to deadly levels? Another thing to put off until later to contemplate. Discord, however, was radiating power like a bonfire, without regard for how it might affect those around him. Or what such power might spontaneously create without conscious direction. And Luna, my favorite Dreamtime invader. Discord said, sliding suddenly to the side, still avoiding those pink dreams featuring you as the star performer. A pink cloud appeared beside him, pulsating, and a faint mmm could be heard. Albus could see her face turning pink and she started to sputter, much as Princess Twilight had a moment ago. Who was this creature to talk so intimately with a ruler of a nation? And how did they manage to blush through their fur? Can't keep any secrets from you, can they? He said, with an elbow nudge to her shoulder, and a wink from one of his eyes. The cloud disappeared, replaced by a miniature Luna looking into a pony's head with a microscope. The scalp and skull were peeled to the side. Discord suddenly twisted and was in front of the three Pegasi. Oh, you must be the guest of honor being honored, he said to Castor. He grinned wider than his face. Let me guess, shining armor, right? And then he leaned to the right, addressing the man's wife. And you must be mi amore cadenza. He leaned farther to the right. And this is little Flurry Heart. He looked her up and down approvingly. What a dear you are. And such lovely ornamentation. He made a show of examining her necklace. She stared up at him, as wide-eyed as her parents. There were three of him in front of the three Pegasi. The Discords bowed simultaneously. I am Discord, and at your service, they said in three-part harmony. Everyone was staring at the three Pegasi in surprise, even the alicorns. Celestia seemed to be most interested in the girl's necklace. The others were clearly surprised by the names bandied about by Discord, especially the two from the Crystal Empire. Albus frowned at the names Discord had used addressing the Searles. Could their names actually translate into those? And how had this Discord known that fact? How much time had he spent on the other side of the portal? Or was he merely playing games with the rulers of the Crystal Empire? When the three Discords straightened, they said, still harmonizing, oh dear, those colors won't do at all. They snapped their fingers in sequence. Castor's colors changed to a white coat, with a light and dark blue mane and tail. His wing feathers had blue tinges at the edges. His hooves and eyes turned blue. Melada turned into a pink Pegasus with a tricolor purple, magenta, and yellow mane and tail, with purple wings, hooves, and eyes. Talia also remained a Pegasus, but with a light magenta coat, violet, arctic blue, and light pink, mane and tail, and pink feathers with a dark pink edging. Her eyes and hooves were a light opal. Everyone stared at them, with the two from the Crystal Empire going wide-eyed in shock. If the two adult Pegasi had had horns instead of wings, they would have been impossible to differentiate from the royal couple at a distance. Discord had to be taking the PSS, Albus decided. The one closest to Talia said, imagine the shock you'll give your friends the first time they see you change into a winged pony. He giggled madly. You'll be the life of every party. Albus wasn't sure, but he thought he might have seen the other two miniature Discords wink at the adults. He tried to hide his shock. Had the creature just given a squib an animagus form? Squibs had far too little magic to initiate the transformation, even if they somehow managed the long and difficult training required to achieve such a goal. Had he done so for all three? Now there was just one Discord, in front of Castor. "I hope you're more fun than the other shining armor," he said, elbowing the uncomfortable-looking stallion. He stage whispered, "He's such a spoilsport, you know." A miniature shining armor appeared prancing daintily around Discord's head, with his head held high and back straight and the bristles of a broomstick poking out under his tail. Discord stood mostly straight and added, "And you've been doing such a good job of chaos, too, while pretending to bring order." He wiped an oversized tear from his left eye. His next victim was the pink olicorn. He smiled at her toothily. "And you're still meddling in ponies' love lives, aren't you? Bending their little minds. Warping their emotions. Destroying their wills. All in the name of Lovey," he said teasingly. He ignored her sputtering denials, but several of the listening ponies began giving her questioning looks. The unicorn's shining armor's face turned red and he looked like he was close to losing his temper. "Ah, Twilight," he said fondly. "That pirate romance from the other side any good?" A mare in a long dress pranced into view. Chasing behind her was a well-muscled pony in a pirate costume with a rear pegleg and a parrot on his back. The mare kept looking back, but she wasn't running away very hard. Twilight stared at him in dismay. "You know, the one stuffed under your mattress. How does it compare with the other 100 you've read?" Her head dropped, blushing yet again. "You know, writers are quite prolific over there. Over 800 romance titles hit the stands each month." He grinned at her as her head snapped up eagerly. He wagged his eyebrows suggestively. She blushed and started to stammer that she really didn't have that many, that she only read them when she had nothing else to read. He laughed and patted her shoulder. Her 5 friends, and the 3 rulers, were giving her thoughtful looks. Shining Armor was staring at her in horror. He looked at Harry as the colt tried to shrink behind Twilight. "And you," he said lovingly, who knew that one little unicorn could create such chaos across 2 universes merely by existing. He sighed deeply, contentedly. "And it just continues to snowball." A giant snowball appeared over Harry's head, then crashed down over him. Princess Twilight and Princess Cadance danced to the side in surprise, and then they hurried to brush off the snow, which dissipated as soon as they touched it. And speaking of chaos, he appeared in front of Sweetie Belle. "Who knew you were such a MSTR? The 3 of you have done me proud," he continued, throwing his 3 arms across the 3 cutie mark crusaders. "Despite the fact that their sisters were separating them. I can just sit back and enjoy the show." He shoved a paper bag in front of all 4 of them. "Popcorn?" he asked. A row of Discords appeared in theater chairs watching a large screen on which Sweetie Belle's cauldron was multicolored clouds of smoke. The fillies, and Harry, looked more than a bit uncertain, and would have backed away if he hadn't had such a good grip on them. Harry hesitantly reached forward and took a hoofful of the treat. Discord smiled widely. The creature appeared in front of Albus. They stared at each other for several moments. Then Discord sidled forward, bent low, and wrapped an arm over the headmaster's shoulders. "I really have to thank you for being such a secretive, manipulative BSTRD 12 years ago," he stage whispered beside the wizard's flicking ear. "If you had told anyone about the full prophecy, he would have won the war by the end of that December. And the world would have gone up in smoke 2 years, 9 months, and 26 days later as the Ruskies retaliated using nukes against those who they thought were attacking them. And then set off their secret," actual quotes floated in the air as he said that word, "doomsday nukes in the Ural Mountains a short time later." He paused and leaned back, his eyes glittering. "Well done. Well done, indeed." He shook the wizard's hand enthusiastically. His paw had actually become a hand, as had Albus' right hoof. "For that, alone, you deserve the name, White Hat." Albus stared back at Discord, eyes wide. How did he know of the prophecy? How long had this creature been watching the wizarding world? Had he traveled through it? How had he heard of the prophecy? How long had he been spying on them? Discord grinned creepily, still pumping his hand. For an instant so short Albus wondered if he had imagined it. The creature in front of him transformed into a tall muscular man, with a trident in one hand and astride a sea pony. A fine spray of water hit his face, leaving the salty smell of the ocean. A faint rumble shook the floor under his hooves, as if there was a distant earthquake. Then the creature was back to normal before Albus could so much as blink. Albus' face was dry. No one else seemed to notice anything unusual. As far as he could tell, no one but himself had seen the brief change. Discord leaned closer. "I would have been so disappointed if that had happened," he said. His eyes flashed red for a moment. Albus was suddenly glad he had not shared the full prophecy with anyone, not even the Potters or Longbottoms. Discord suddenly looked at the Weasleys, still grinning. "And my favorite pranksters are still at work, I see." He studied the twins for a moment, then chuckled. "Keep guessing." Ron, Ginny, and Percy were guiltily relieved when the Lord of Chaos passed over them to Myrtle. "Oh, my," he said gleefully. "You have been making up for lost time, haven't you? Not above using what you learned while a ghost to the best advantage, no less, are you? All those secret passages that no one living knows about. Except you." His creepy grin became even creepier. 3 miniature Hogwarts students appeared behind his head, giggling naughtily as they ducked behind a statue close against his head. His hand was still shaking Albus' hand up and down, even though it was no longer attached to Discord. The twins gave the girl a careful look after seeing just which statue the students used. Discord paused, then shot back to Princess Celestia. "You'll treasure the days when you were bored by nobles trying to sneak through the laws, Tia." He sighed contentedly. "It'll soon be just like old times." The princess gave him an alarmed look. He draped an arm across Fluttershy's shoulders. "Come, my dear, let's check out the hors d'oeuvres." His hand paw was back on his arm. Albus' hand was once more a hoof. But the welcoming line, the yellow and pink Pegasus weakly started to protest in a voice barely above a whisper, turning back towards her previous position beside Rainbow Dash. Discord laughed. "I don't think that's a problem, my dear," he said, glancing back at the princesses. Princess Celestia merely raised an exasperated eyebrow, but didn't say anything. The line of ponies waiting to see them had disappeared. She shook her head ruefully and started towards the front of the ballroom. Dazed, the rest of the group followed in her wake. Almost as soon as they had arrived at the seating that had been reserved for them, a mob of ponies started arriving, as well. It appeared that the welcoming line had been an attempt to cut off and manage the crowd of ponies now clustering around them. Now there wasn't the social pressure to continue into the room and let others meet the royalty and their guests that the line at the entrance had imposed. Now they could just gather in a mob around them. He noticed that the princesses always had a cluster of nobles around them. Some listened, some offered opinions, some wanted to discuss matters of policy. The sisters pretended to be interested, but he could tell otherwise. He did notice, however, that Princess Celestia would look at Discord, every once in a while, and the very edges of her mouth would lift in a tiny smile. Then she would look at those around her and smirk. Her fiery mane and tail were quite animated. The music was surprisingly close to what he expected to hear at ministry parties. Plus, like the private parties he had attended for all these years, the ballroom had a wonderful garden area on the other side of the exterior wall. Doors were reasonably spaced along its length. He saw that Prince Blueblood seemed particularly adroit at escaping a cluster of ponies when they formed. More than once the prince rescued the Searles from being overwhelmed, even though they tried to stay close to the royal sisters to avoid being singled out. For some reason, the daughter looked to be attracting a bit more attention from the adults rather than her age peers. The prince usually asked the daughter for a dance, or sent someone to ask her for a dance. The parents frequently took that cue and went to the dance floor, themselves. The first time Albus tried to decline a dance, with the reason that he was too old, he received a puzzled look. "You're not on your deathbed, yet," the mayor said, looking him up and down. "But I am unfamiliar with the dances you have," he said. "Fifth," was her response. "I'll teach you," and cajoled him into dancing with her. After she had shown him the steps on all fours, and he was starting to get comfortable, she subtly grilled him on his political position on the other side of the portal. It was surprisingly entertaining. After that first dance, he had a number of mares coming up to him. It was notable that the mares approached him as solitary dancers, and not groups as he saw on the dance floor and above it. When a rather muscular stallion approached him, he was at first unsure. However, as he glanced across the dance floor, he saw a couple of stallions dancing together. Taking that as a cue, he accepted. Sunburst, unfortunately, did not appear to be attending this ball, he saw. However, the questions the ponies all asked became tiringly predictable. Not that he let that show. He had expected it, truthfully. Preparation was always the key in these kinds of encounters. Let slip only the information you wanted released. He noticed a bit later, when he was at the refreshments table, that some of his previous partners danced only with a dedicated partner. Or partners. Or spent the rest of the evening talking to definite cliques. He had to smile. They must think him quite the amateur to think he wouldn't notice. Or they assumed he wasn't important enough for them to be concerned that he might realize what they had done. The four witches managed to drag Harry out onto the dance floor, he saw, more than once. In fact, he saw several young mares asking him to dance as well. Seeing the boy's expression every time some pony addressed him as Prince Harry Sparkle Potter was vastly amusing. The poor boy didn't know whether to be upset that they had addressed him as Prince or proud that the last name included Sparkle. Dumbledore could only sigh at the problems that name would cause at Hogwarts and the English wizarding world in general. Myrtle and Percy both danced as well, although Myrtle seemed to have stiff competition for stallions. Their lack of cutie marks at their ages seemed to draw more than a little attention. The twins eschewed dancing for some reason, preferring to explore every nook and cranny of the room they could reach. When the crush around the princesses had slacked off considerably, he made his way to the royals. This close he could feel not only their magical auras but that it was actually warmer standing close to Princess Celestia. It was almost like standing in the sunlight. It was especially noticeable to him when someone walked between the two of them, like a cloud sometimes passes in front of the sun and everything is slightly cooler. It made him want to just stand there and bask in the warmth. Which explained some of the crowd around her. "Princess Celestia," he said softly, respectfully. It was such a strange experience to be looking up at someone so much taller than himself. He rather imagined it was how first years felt talking with Rubius. She looked down at him. "How are you enjoying the ball, headmaster?" "It is quite different from what I am used to, but at the same time quite similar." "And it's Albus, please, your majesty," he said quietly. She smiled. "Then in private you may call me Celestia," she said back in the same low tone he had used. "I would be honored." He paused briefly, then said, "Could you tell me about," he pointedly looked up at a window where Discord and Fluttershy were sipping tea and discussing something. Their table, chairs, and they themselves, were sitting at a right angle to the floor. In fact, from their point of view, everyone else was on the wall and they were on the floor. Her smile faded to a grimace. "Yes, the god of chaos. You haven't dealt with him, yet, have you?" She shook her head. "It would take a long time to explain everything." He looked around and said, "If you don't mind, I'm not exactly in a hurry." She looked at him amusedly, then nodded. "We first met him thousands of years ago," she started. Ponies listening in began to drift away. The stories weren't ones they didn't already know. He tried not to gasp at the proof that the three were really older than the Roman Empire. She went on to explain how the three tribes had first encountered the creature while fleeing the Wendigos. It was peaceful, if odd, at first, and more than a bit strange. But then, after the ponies had established Equestria, the sisters had fought with discord. He felt he should rule, with chaos being the watchword for the land. The royal sisters, and the ponies, had disliked the extreme chaos he preferred. Receiving confirmation that Discord was far more powerful than the two sisters combined was very disturbing. Or, at least, he had been back then. Her descriptions of his reality-bending feats left Albus staggered. Each of the sisters, Albus now knew, could easily outmatch him in a duel without trying very hard. If this creature was a wizard, then he made Merlin look like a baby in a crib. By every definition Dumbledore knew of, this Discord was a god. The god of chaos had ruled for an unknown amount of time before the sisters had sealed him away with the elements of harmony for over 1,000 years. Recently he had escaped and then been rebound in stone. This time by the element bearers, named so because they had used the same elements formerly wielded by the sisters. Which the sisters, for some reason, could not use anymore. Then the princesses had freed Discord and tasked Princess Twilight and her friends with turning him into a friend. They had succeeded for certain, loose definitions of friend. Abruptly, Discord was sitting in a smoking room chair beside them. The chair was, of course, smoking, and blowing rings of smoke into the air. "Actually, my dear," he said, "I met you ponies long before then." His eyes glittered and a smug smirk appeared on his face. Albus stared at the Draconequus, then glanced at the identical Draconequus still talking with Fluttershy. "Yes," Discord said, "multiple instances of myself are as easy as falling off a log." He fell off the log that his chair had transformed into. He dusted himself off with a hand broom that vanished as he dropped it. The smoking chair reappeared, with him in it. It was upside down this time, and rotated sideways in mid-air as he watched them and smirked. Princess Celestia sighed. "And he has this annoying habit of popping up when you least expect it." The chair and Discord disappeared. A large metal box was on the floor before them, with a metal crank in one side. A few musical notes played as the crank turned, then the lid popped open. A life-sized puppet of the Draconequus shot out, grinning madly. He was dressed in a pink cardigan and skirt, with a pink hat, purse, and gloves. "Boo!" he shouted, sending several nearby ponies scurrying away. "And not showing up when you wish he would." She glanced at Albus from the side of her eyes. Discord simpered and cleared his throat. "Ahem," he said in a sickly sweet voice that Albus found to be disturbingly familiar. "As I was saying." He gave them a sharp look, like Malfoy would give to a Muggleborn for interrupting him. "About 6,000 years ago, give or take a few decades, I was wandering the northern plains. They're now called the far northern wastelands, you know." His condescendingly sweet voice made Albus want to grit his teeth. The creature sounded exactly like Senior Undersecretary Umbridge when she was being her most infuriatingly frustrating. Discord was very familiar with the wizarding world, it appeared. Was anything unknown to this creature? It was just after having a delightful little chat in Shedet with Sobek. "Eventually, I encountered one of those tragic little plays so common at the time." He dabbed a pink handkerchief at the crocodile tear that appeared at the edge of one of his eyes. The crocodile-shaped tear tried to crawl away before it was captured. Discord in a box disappeared in a cloud of pink smoke. The smoke suddenly formed into a little scene of 4 tiny frantic ponies. There were 2 adults, an adolescent, and a foal, all in shades of brown and white. They were at a cliff's edge, surrounded on 3 sides by a pack of wolves as large as they were themselves. The cliff was hundreds of feet above the continuing plain behind the ponies. It very effectively cut off their escape. With half their escape route cut off, it allowed the wolf pack to group much closer together than would be normal. Which further reduced the odds of the family escaping. The smoke changed into a 3-dimensional image of the scene that zoomed in on the ponies. From their actions, covering the 2 smaller ones and staying together instead of fleeing, Albus knew it had to be a family. He decided the larger adult must be the stallion, and the smaller the mare. Nearby ponies in the ballroom, at least the braver ones, crowded closer to watch. Several of the Pegasi couples hovered overhead, watching. The family of ponies, all earth ponies, had been crowded to the edge of the cliff. The adults were slightly in front of the 2 smaller ones, with the foal almost under its dam's torso. The 2 smaller ones were trembling in fear, close to running away in a panic. They had a choice of fighting it out or jumping to their likely deaths. Or the adults could abandon the smaller two and flee. One, or maybe both, might escape if they did that. But with the number of wolves in the scene, he doubted any would survive such an attempt. There were too many wolves and they were too close to each other for a bolting pony to slip through a gap. From their actions, though, the adults clearly intended to stay, hopeless though it might be. A horrible tragedy, from the watching pony's point of view. A small Discord in a dark blue business suit appeared in the smoke above the scene, patting its mouth as it yawned in disinterest. I almost passed on. Discord continued in a fake British accent, a monocle appearing over one eye and a closed umbrella dangling from his arm. Such things were a regular happenstance in those days, you know, old chap, quite boring, you know. He echoed the smaller Discord's yawn. This time, however, it occurred to me to do something unexpected. Discord started smirking. The stallion and the adolescent suddenly sprouted wings. A wonderfully chaotic thought. Discord practically gloated, staring intently at four trapped ponies. What would happen now? Two could easily escape, gliding to safety off the cliff. Or would they stay and fruitlessly fight the doom that faced their family? The tiny Discord watched with evident delight and anticipation. Such suspense. The wolves were taken aback at the unexpected change in two of their victims. But they quickly recovered and made their way closer. They wanted the four away from the edge, to run. That way none of the wolves, or their prey, would accidentally fall off the cliff to their deaths. It was doubtful the surviving wolves would be able to get to the dead prey before others had scavenged it. No, it would be better if they could get them to run. The ponies were also stunned at the change. The stallion flapped his wings once and twice. His front legs came off the ground. That definitely alarmed the wolves. He shouted something to the adolescent. The adolescent was staring at its wings in shock as they moved up and down. It started at the shout, stumbled, and grabbed for the foal with its front two legs. The wolf started a charge from the side with the mare to drive them in a panic away from the cliff edge and towards the partially hidden and more numerous group of the pack. The stallion turned and grabbed the mare in his front legs, and pushed them all over the edge. It was a chaotic few seconds as the four ponies tumbled down through the air, almost crashing into the face of the cliff. It became clear seconds later that the stallion was gliding quickly a few yards from the face of the cliff. The mare clutched frantically at him, as he did her. The adolescent with the foal was more falling than gliding. The little ones were barely managing to hold each other. It appeared, more than once, that the foal was going to slip free and fall to its death, or they'd both crash into the cliff and suffer the same fall. But both sets were falling far slower than the rocks they had disturbed at the top cliff's edge cascading down behind them. Their landing, a reasonable distance from the base of the cliff and well past the scree, was rough. But they were alive. The wolves looked over the cliff's edge, perplexed. The audience in the ballroom breathed a sigh of relief. There was a moment's silence, filled only with the orchestra's music and the soft drone from the dance floor. The scene dissolved into air, revealing Discord once again seated in his pink smoking chair. The ponies standing around them started whispering among themselves. Was Discord really responsible for Pegasi? All four princesses had watched the scene intently. Luna looked at the Draconequus with narrowed eyes. Did that really happen? She asked suspiciously. You wound me. Discord exclaimed, slapping a paw over his chest where an arrow appeared, blood dripping. It's the absolute truth. He slyly looked away as the arrow dissipated. Or are you suggesting that the stallion's desperate longing to save his family triggered his innate magic to find a solution? He cleared his throat, or that I didn't direct the magic gave it a viable outlet, perhaps gave them a bird's instinct on flying? He gave her an offended look. Well, I never. He looked at Celestia and shrugged. But I swear that's what happened. He smirked. The chaos that a flying pony caused on the plains was delicious. He smirked. The flying ponies loved dive-bombing the wolves. He sighed happily. A single, little moment of inspiration, and the chaos continues through to today. The chair and Draconequus disappeared. Fluttershy and Discord were now dancing a slow dance on the ceiling. They were accompanied by a small band of 5 Discords playing a music no one else could hear. The 4 princesses exchanged looks. The crowd of nobles and court hangers-on around them slowly dispersed to spread the story of what they had seen and heard. Debates on the scene's accuracy likely would rage for centuries, Albus knew. Especially given Discord's history of pranking ponies. Because, how trustworthy was Discord's word? A tiny Discord appeared on Shining Armor's head, and blew a raspberry at Princess Cadance. Princess Cadance narrowed her eyes and glared at Shining Armor. He began to look alarmed and took a quick look around. He looked back at her and raised his eyebrows in hopeful query. He was clearly afraid he had done something wrong to make her angry at him. It was clear who wore the trousers in that marriage. Albus saw Castor with his wife and daughter not too far away. He wondered what the squib thought of Discord. Did he realize just how powerful the creature really was? Or did he think it all hyperbole, exaggeration, and tricks? He watched the man's contemplative expression for several moments until the man looked over at him. The headmaster smiled and raised an eyebrow. He inclined his head to one side. Castor narrowed his eyes, slowly nodded, said something to his wife. The 2 stallions slipped away from the whispering royals and the entourage around them. Castor's wife led their daughter to the refreshments table. Once the 2 former men had reached a secluded alcove, they stopped. There was a moment's silence as they studied each other. Of course, being ponies made it very difficult to really make any judgments based on stance and expression. Albus noted that the man-turned-Pegasus avoided looking him in the eyes. "How did you get involved with the Equestrians?" Albus finally asked. "Are you going to RPE my mind if I say the wrong thing?" Harry saw Talia returning from the dance floor when she suddenly changed direction from the refreshment table and towards the Hogwarts contingent. Had the princesses told the Searles that the latecomers her age and younger were actually students from Earth, just as she was? "Are you really from Earth?" she asked when she reached them. Apparently, they had. The twins grinned at her and said, "That we are, dear," and threw their hooves across whichever of the others they could reach and each other. Percy frowned at them. "Mostly," he said officiously. If he'd been wearing robes, Harry was sure he would have been smoothing the fronts down. He pointed at the 3 cutie mark crusaders. "These 3 fillies are actually equestrians. Their sisters are element bearers, highly placed nobles. But we all go to Hogwarts School of Exceptional Students, in Scotland. It's very exclusive, invitation only, you know." He didn't quite preen, but he looked smug. She stared at them for a moment, then frowned. "So, if you're ponies, here, then you have magic. Just like me. Except I don't have enough magic to do anything on Earth. My father told me when we went through the portal that people completely without magic went through as people." Percy and the twins exchanged surprised looks. Ron, Ginny, and Myrtle just frowned. "And that those with enough magic become unicorns." She stared a moment longer at the twins. "So, can you do magic on Earth?" "My father said only about 1 in 1,000 people have magic." She studied them a bit longer. "But you all have magic, because you're ponies like me, and go to the same school." She looked down at the floor, then back up. "I've never heard of Hogwarts as an English school, so, is it a magic school?" Harry was impressed that she so quickly guessed they were witches and wizards. The Weasleys were caught off balance. Harry stepped forward. "Nah, it's just a private school. They only invite students who had a parent go there. Both my parents went there. It's why I got an invite even though I was in Equestria at the time." He frowned. "I do wonder how the owl found me, though. It really shouldn't have been able to." His frown deepened and he looked up at the dancing couple on the ceiling. His gaze sought out Discord in particular. "Owl? Yeah. He shook his head. For some weird reason an owl brought my invitation instead of regular post. He made an expression of disgust and shook his head. My relatives really wouldn't have liked that. She sighed and looked disappointed. She shook her head. Princess Celestia told me that you were all wizards and witches, and that you went to a school called Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. They all stood silent for a moment. Several other young ponies had gathered to listen. Myrtle sighed and looked apologetic. It's against the wizarding laws to talk about magic to anyone not magical. Talia glared at the unicorn witch. But I'm magical, or I wouldn't be a pony, would I? But not all non-magicals wizards and witches who can't do magic, but have a little bit, anyway know about wizard kind, put in Percy. So, we have to act as if we don't know what you're talking about or we'll be arrested for breaking the law. Unless we meet you in a wizarding place, we have to assume you don't know about magic. Talia looked around the room. This place not magical enough for you? She asked sarcastically. Being here doesn't mean you knew about the wizards and witches on the other side, does it, now? Percy said. They stared at each other a moment before she reluctantly nodded. She hadn't known about them until the princess had told her. It's because we're afraid that if the muggles find out about us, they'll restart the witch hunts of old, explained Ginny. She shivered. It was Harry's turn to sigh. Even though most of the people hurt or killed in those hunts weren't actually wizards or witches. So, if you talk about this to anyone who isn't a witch or wizard, said Myrtle, the Aurors will come and arrest you. You even have to be careful who you tell in your own family. Aurors? Magical police, explained Harry. Talia stared at them, as did several of their audience. Do you really use wands? She asked, changing the conversation. Ginny popped the wand out of her holster. She had it shoot some sparks, and levitated a piece of cake from the nearby refreshment table. Then cast Lumos. That she was a Pegasus and doing magic awed the surrounding ponies, and whispering quickly spread the word to those who didn't see it themselves. Harry noticed a guard pony headed their way. He also saw a couple of guard Pegasi watching from overhead, as well. In a matter of moments there were 4 guards on the floor around them, watching from far enough away not to be a distraction to the conversation. The obvious unconventional magic had drawn their wary attention. Here, said George, and hoofed her his wand. Say Lumos, and think that the end of the wand lights up. Talia tried it, but nothing happened. It just feels like a warm stick to me, she said, and looked at it in disappointment. She gave it back. And that's why you never received an invite to Hogwarts, explained Fred. You haven't enough magic to work a wand, so. He shrugged. Somewhat disgruntled at the way they had lied to her, at first, the conversation didn't last too much longer. She was also disappointed to confirm she didn't have enough magic to be a witch. She did, however, get them to let her take a picture of them. She promised to mail them copies when she got home. Harry told her to just send it to the Equestrian embassy, addressed to the Weasleys, care of Princess Twilight. She had barely turned away before there was a crowd of ponies around Ginny, of all 3 races, demanding she show them more magic. They were all astounded at seeing a non-unicorn so effortlessly manipulate magic. Soon Ron, Ginny, Scootaloo, Apple Bloom, and Percy were showing off some of the things they could do with wands. Percy, the most advanced of them, was soon the center of attention. Harry saw the twins sneak away while the others were occupied. He hoped they hadn't discovered that salt was the pony equivalent of alcohol to their magic. Combine the two, and, well, it could be as bad as any alcohol-driven party on the other side. Only magical. He shuddered. Albus took a step back at the naked antagonism from the pony muggle squib. After another moment of silence, he said, I'm sure nothing of the sort will be necessary, unless you plan to reveal the wizarding world to the muggles. He smiled gently. I'm sure you want that holocaust as little as I do. The Pegasus stared at him with narrowed eyes before he slowly nodded. I was a sergeant in the Surrey police when I noticed that there seemed to be a lot of activity in the green zone beside Little Whinging. He continued on to give a brief summary of how the situation with the Equestrians had been kicked up to the Prime Minister, including their efforts to keep the word magic out of the public's notice in order to prevent an antagonistic response by the Conservatives in the church. That they hadn't suspected there were wizards and witches until they met Princess Celestia and the Prime Minister had mentioned there might be people who could do magic. That had been a very rude awakening, he explained frostily. As had the revelations of just how wizards and witches tended to regard the muggles, and squibs and why the wizards and witches wanted to stay hidden and secret from their non-magical brethren. Plus, that he knew all about Harry Potter, Voldemort, and Hogwarts. Castor stressed that if the wizards could keep their pointy little hats and heads out of the muggle arrangements with the Equestrians, there wouldn't be any problems with anyone breaking the wizards' precious statute of secrecy. The only people who knew the truth were those that had to know the truth. That, in fact, having the Equestrians at the forefront provided cover for the wizards, until the wizards felt safe enough to come out of hiding. If they ever did. He also mentioned that near squibs, if they wanted to be Pegasi, could come to Equestria and work for the British government. As could disaffected half-bloods, except they would be unicorns. All would be welcome in Equestria, from what the royal sisters had told him. An English embassy on this side of the portal would probably employ hundreds and service both their needs easily. Why hasn't the Prime Minister said anything to Minister for Magic? How, came the simple answer. There is no mechanism for him to initiate contact. Telling the wizarding portrait in the Prime Minister's office that he wants to talk to the Minister for Magic has been useless. Albus sighed. Of course, it would be. The Muggles had no magic to trigger the magic in the portrait into action. Unlike most portraits, it wasn't supposed to be constantly moving, hence it could only be activated from the wizard side of the connection. Plus, Cornelius, a pure BLD, would dismiss any request from the Muggle Prime Minister as nothing important. Muggles were, as far as he was concerned, barely more than subsistence farmers. Totally inconsequential beings unworthy of his attention except in an emergency, a wizarding emergency, that is. Well, Albus said, we know about the Equestrians, and that they are involved with the Muggles, too, now. What are you going to do? Castor's eyes narrowed and his stance became a bit more hostile. If it's anything that we consider hostile, we are more than ready to take that step. We know where most wizards are, now, and have already trained up hundreds of half-bloods and near-squibs in our military. Nothing, Albus said, shrugging, not letting on his alarm that the Muggles knew what near-squibs were and were actively working with them. Near-squibs were considered squibs, by wizarding law, and were allowed to work with Muggles. The only restriction under Ministry law was that the squibs could not talk about magic to uninformed Muggles. But if the Muggles already knew? The laws were rather vague in that respect. As long as you don't threaten the statute of secrecy, the old wizard said. He sighed. The Department of Magical Accidents is going to start investigating all instances of accidental magic. The goal will be to catch Muggle-born children, and their parents, before their friends notice. The sooner we can get them prepared and informed, the safer we will be. He paused. Some will suggest we should foster the magical children with wizarding families. Kidnapping children or coercing their parents is against the Queen's law. They stared at each other. Albus remembered what Discord had said about the world going up in smoke in retaliation for attacks on Muggles. He had no doubt the Muggles would regard the taking of children from the rightful parents as an attack. Especially as it would necessitate obliviating the parents. It might have worked a generation ago. Or at least before the Equestrians arrived. Now, too many would notice the magic and begin to question. I intend to point out that that would be counterproductive in the long term. You need to bring your laws more into line with the Queen's law. Many of them are outright contrary to laws we've had for decades. It will be very difficult. But if you use the excuse that you are securing the statute of secrecy in view of the appearance of the Equestrians on the scene. Perhaps. But still difficult. But better than annihilation. We know where the important wizarding enclaves are all over the world, now. Especially in England. Diagon Alley, Hogsmeade, the Ministry itself. Many of the minor ones, too, such as Godric's Hollow. Moreover, with squibs, like myself, who aren't a part of the wizarding world, who are in fact excluded from it, Her Majesty has our full support. So simply hiding with Muggle-specific charms won't work. We can find you. Albus gave him a long look. If they already knew how where the Ministry, Hogsmeade, and Diagon Alley were, the Muggles could do the wizarding world a lot of damage. The Equestrians, though, were the wild card. How would they react if the wizards started obliviating their friends, right and left? What if we both set up a new department, Castor suggested, to allow wizards and witches to work in Her Majesty's government and with the Equestrians? From your side, to preserve the secrecy statute, from our side, to keep the public thinking any magic they see is from equestrian technologies, and not wizards or witches. Working together would be better than working at cross purposes. Castor paused, then added, the Queen's government takes a very dim view of mind RPE. That will have to be the first thing to go. Albus stared at him levelly. And the Equestrians? What would they do? Castor shrugged. They want trade. They've shown they are quite nimble at juggling their neighbors, quite nimble, indeed. He looked over at the two sisters and lifted his chin in their direction. Princess Celestia has enough magic to move the sun, here. Bloody hell. The sun. He shook his head. Princess Luna has enough to move the moon. I saw them do that yesterday and today. Imagine what they could do if wizards. PSS. Them. Off. He looked down for a moment. Or we do. He looked back up at Albus. Working together may be the only way we have to level the playing field with the Equestrians. We have far more to gain with them as friends than enemies. Albus remembered how powerful Luna had appeared when hunting the basilisk. She hadn't even been winded. Plus, she had shrunk the basilisk almost to the size of a small, harmless garden snake, something no one in the wizarding world could possibly have accomplished. But moving the moon. He turned and looked at the two sisters. The sun. The sisters had to have used magic to fool the poor muggle. Castor had to have been tricked by the sisters. There was simply no way anyone, or any pony, could move either the sun or the moon. If they had, astrologers would have noticed that long ago. He knew neither the sun nor the moon had risen or set at an unusual time in the last few days. Or centuries. He took a slow breath and carefully studied the four princesses. He slowly stopped looking at them with his eyes and shifted to using his magic. Two brightly glowing images came into view, completely obscuring the other two. He couldn't see them as individuals, they were too bright for that. He couldn't even make out their shapes. As before, one was half again as bright as the other. Just how powerful were they? Something was watching him. He blinked his eyes, several times. The room swam back into view. Princess Celestia was looking at him, and smirking. Had she actually felt him looking at her? He shook his head. It had to be a coincidence that she was looking at him. No one could pick up on such a small thing when in such magic-rich location. Especially with so many ponies around looking at their rulers. Castor looked around the room, as did Albus. Discord was nowhere in sight. And, Castor said, based on what we've seen, the royal sisters might ask the god of chaos to step in. I rather doubt he would listen to either of us. So, do you really want the god of chaos throwing a wobbly at you? He took a deep breath. If even half the things they've told us about that creature are true, he could wipe out both magical and non-magicals and not break a sweat. After all, he fought the two sisters to a standstill. They required the help of the elements of harmony, a magical artifact, to beat him. Albus shuddered. They continued discussing things for the next hour. Naturally, no decisions could be made, but Princess Twilight would be their contact point for the moment, they decided, before separating. Castor left to find his wife and daughter. And Albus needed some time to mull things over. Getting the Wizengamot to agree to some of the Muggles' requirements was going to be very, very difficult. Fortunately, the Muggles were willing to give him time, if he could get the more egregious wizarding laws revised quickly enough. During one trip to the refreshments table, he noticed the twins were no longer scouring the ballroom's walls anymore. They seemed disappointed for some reason. However, later in the evening, he saw the twins dancing, or trying to dance, with other ponies. Mares, he assumed, from their dresses. The ball lasted for several hours before it began to break up. The children were all dead on their feet by that time, and their sisters had to carry them. Percy carried Ginny while the twins switched off carrying Ron. The younger ones protested, of course, but not much. Which amused the adults. Although it could have been just one twin who carried Ron and they merely pretended to swch. Princess Twilight, of course, refused to let anyone else carry Harry to her castle. Then she kindly escorted Albus back through the portal. The reverse trip through the portal security was much more stringent than his arrival. They really did not want someone sneaking into his world. When he was back in his office, he brought out his pensieve. Then he requested that Severus join him in a nightcap. He poured them both a large fire whiskey, and settled back into his chair. There was much to discuss. Little sleep would be had before morning. What he had seen and heard had major implications for the wizarding world. It would take intricate maneuvering to keep the peace in the new triangle of power between the wizards, the Equestrians, and the Muggles. But the benefits far outweighed the difficulties. The most difficult part would be getting the old wizarding families to take Muggles seriously. If he could get the princesses to assist him, Voldemort would not be a problem. As powerful and cunning as the wizard might become, he still would not be able to stand up to the sisters. Plus, while he might be still on this plane instead of the next, it might not be that enjoyable an existence if someone, or rather some creature, threw him to the moon or into the sun. However, clearly the most obvious thing to do would be a new rule waiting for the Gryffindors when the winter halls were over and they returned. 11. Students are strictly forbidden to call upon a certain equestrian Atlantean during Professor Snape's lessons. Or any other lesson. Or within Hogwarts in general. Or anywhere near it. Or quote this rule out loud more than once in 24 hours. Per whole group and not per person. Just don't. Penalties include dismissal from Hogwarts and/or time in Azkaban. The other three houses would discover the same rule, only not labeled with a number, posted beside their house entrances, inside the common rooms, that would probably leave them all puzzled. Who was this mysterious equestrian? The day after the ball started with laughter, then a mournful, duet wail from the twins' room. The Weasleys quickly gathered, followed by the other castle inhabitants. They burst into the room to see two very plain-looking, dull-coated Mares. One was much shorter than the other, with a bushy, stringy mane and tail, and an expression that made her look like an oaf. Her coat was a dull gray, the mane was just a darker gray, and it completely hid her ears. The other was tall and thin with buck teeth, a crooked muzzle, and brown coat. Her mane, the same color as her coat, was short, almost unnoticeable, with ears that stuck up twice as high as they should. No one would ever confuse the two. Making that even more unlikely was the white furred F on the face of the brown mare. They were still unicorns, fortunately, but the horns were twisted instead of a spiral. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. Ginny saved him from his dilemma by bursting into laughter and sitting down. A moment later, Ron followed. Percy tried to hide a smile, but it didn't work. If his mum hadn't assured the twins that the poison joke could easily be cured, the Weasleys would have been horrified. But, in the meantime, Myrtle grabbed her camera and took pictures. So it was, after breakfast, that they all adjourned to the Ponyville Day Spa where Aloe prepared a special bath for the twins. Lotus Blossom made sure the rest were properly attended to in the other pool. Harry might have objected if it wasn't so obvious the Mares in the group really liked it. That and it gave him an excuse to cuddle with his mum and no one could tease him about it. And gave the others plenty of time to tell the Blossom sisters all about the ball the night before, including Discord's revelations about Pegasi. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 37. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author tkepner on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.